Disruption. Disruption is a word that, to be honest, I'm starting to be a bit tired of. Everything is disruptive, or everything is disruption, or everything has been about to be disrupted or will be disrupted tomorrow afternoon. When the reality is that disruption has happened to us humans for millennia. Or can we say that the wheel didn't disrupt transport? Or can we say that currency didn't disrupt the way we engage in commerce with each other? Or can we say that the zero, the steam engine, the Windows, Gmail, electricity, the railroads. Disruption, if you look at it, is actually an analogy for creativity. It's actually an analogy for what us human beings have strived as we go along. As we actually intuitively agree that if you live in a capitalist environment, growth, change, new is always there. To talk about disruption, to me, is very much about talking about creativity, about talking about innovation, about free flow of ideas. And those ideas don't have to be business related. Those ideas can be psychological, can be philosophical, can be political. And the source of this should not and will not and cannot be all about strategy and business and manufacturing processes. Of course they are about. But the reality is that disruption happens when you really engage with our sheer nature of being human, of making our lives easier, or taking us to places that we've never been before, experience things that we've never experienced before. Joseph Schumpeter and his creative destruction approach was an incredible source, or is an incredible source of thinking for us. And if you combine this with Daniel Kahneman's behavioral economics and the reality that psychology and economics touch, that behavioral sciences have a profound impact and effect in business, then you can really understand how innovation happens and how companies cannot lay still, how companies need to continuously reinvent themselves. It's inevitable that once you've grown, unless you reinvent yourself, you start falling. Because competition will come, because the leadership will get old, because you will get complacent, because of 100 different reasons. And in order for you not to fall and to reinvent yourself and continue growing, call it the learning curve, or call it the growth curve, or call it the interest curve, or call it whatever you want to call it curve, you need some sort of disruption. You either disrupt yourself, you are disrupted, or you think about new things. What are the challenges to create a disruptive brand? Well, to me, there's no real challenge. To me, it's about being yourself. To me, it's about not being complacent. It's about understanding that unless you do something to what the French call secouer le cocotier, shake the coconut tree, unless you do something to really get out of your comfort zone, inevitably, someone will come and will do it for you. Creating a disruptive brand, creating a brand for that matter, from scratch, needs to be disruptive. Otherwise, what's the point? Why would you create something if it's not to compete against somebody else? Why would you create something if it's not to beat the other one? Do you think anyone thinks or proposes to create a business just because of that? No. Challenge is fundamentally to be true to yourself. The challenge, the real challenge that businessmen need to understand is, if you want to be successful, you have to have something unique about you. And this something unique has to combine elements of authenticity and elements of relevance. There's no point in being unique if you're not authentic, because you will never be unique. Or there's no point in being, what is the point of being unique if you're not relevant to a particular audience? And the overarching fundamental to reach something like this is truth. You cannot lie, even less now that social media is paramount. Internet has collapsed the barriers between what you say and what you do. You cannot say something and do something else. And there's hundreds of examples about that. So the real challenge is be honest, be true, and think of something that, whilst it's authentic, it's relevant to a particular audience. If you start a business, if you create a brand, and it's not disruptive, to me, it means you're creating a brand without creativity. Creating without creativity is a bit of a conflict, isn't it, there? Anything that you create, anything that starts, is devised, is thought with a competitor in mind. And if you want to beat your competitor, you have to disrupt in a particular way. Otherwise, what's the point? So we live in a world where everyone is obsessed about UI and UX, where UI and UX do not belong exclusively to the digital world. User interface or user experience. Isn't user interface something to do with the way I sit on this chair? Isn't user interface something to do with ergonomics, where the physical me actually has an interface with a physical thing, or the height of a table, or how you feel inside of a retail environment? And user experience is obviously the same. So the challenge today is that one has to really understand that we live in a world that is converging. And this convergence is where you need to build a brand, making sure that the purpose, the fundamentals, the essence of that brand is consistently the same in every touch point, regardless whether this touch point is physical or digital or what have you. I'm 58. I was born in Morocco, but moved to Spain when I was 40 days old. I went to a French school, then went to university in America, where I studied engineering and did a master's degree in engineering. And then I decided I didn't want to be an engineer. I didn't want to be an engineer, although I don't regret being an engineer, because it's really furbished my brain in a very particular way. I started working in strategy in a moment in 1986 when Spain has just signed the agreement to join the EU. And that was a wonderful time, a very particular time, because there were a lot of companies from Spain looking towards Europe, and a lot of companies in Europe, particularly in Britain, and in financial services, trying to come to Spain. That gave me an incredible exposure to business and business strategy, and I had a most fascinating time for about 6 years until 1991, when I was headhunted to join a company called Wolf Hollins. Obviously, when the headhunter called me, I had no idea of what identity was at the time, corporate identity was called, or what Wolf Hollins was. But when she explained me the actual work, I loved it. I loved it because it meant making strategy visible. It meant mixing strategy and art and design. And yes, I'm an engineer, but I always wanted to be an architect. So there you go. So that opportunity gave me the chance to really join a world where I could see the hard and the soft, IQ and EQ, design and strategy, culture, psychology, anthropology, art converge, and I loved it. I joined Wolf Hollins in '91, and I lasted there until about 2000, where I learned most of what I can say made me someone that really understands what brands are about. It's interesting that you understand that when I joined Wolf Hollins, there was no such a concept of brand and branding as there is today. Brands were kept for FMCGs, for soap and for cornflakes and for what have you, soft drinks. Then the name, the code was corporate identity. Eventually, corporate identity became something very dull and unattractive. There was no sexiness in that combination of words, and people started talking about brands and branding. The good thing about those years at Wolf Hollins, when I was the director of the main board, was that Wally and I created a very, very solid bond. And when Wolf Hollins was sold to Omnicom, we felt it was a wonderful time to start our own business. I felt it was a wonderful time to start my own business. And I started Safran in 2001, and Wally joined me immediately after. He joined, and we started this business in London and Madrid at the same time. That's why we call ourselves Natively Global. And eventually we grew the business to have a number of offices where our clients took us to. I'm married with Anna. I have 3 kids, well, 3 children. Moises, who's a lawyer, Sol, who studies her 5th year of medicine, and Gabriel, who's in his 3rd year of psychology and business.